So this goes back in Satanism quite a way back, by the way. And just to sum up, yes, Charles Manson was definitely a Satanist by every definition of a Satanist.
Now, you know, we actually had on the show earlier, I think it was last year, right, Tim? We had on Chip Coffey talking about the murder of John Lennon. And Chip, of course, is a good friend of our show and host of Psychic Kids on the A&E network. And he was talking about Mark David Chapman and the fact that Chapman claimed to have been possessed at some point and that there may actually be some credibility toward it. And did you do any research into Mark David Chapman's story at all? I know he wasn't a serial killer.
I didn't in Satanic Crime, but I'm actually writing another book. This is Strange Synchronicity, and I'm starting it in September. It's called The Beatles and the Occult.
Gotcha.
Where I look at the Beatles from the perspective of occult practices. And I just looked through that section in the book All You Need Is Love by Peter Brown, which is the most definitive book about the Beatles out there. And Peter Brown's book says that Chapman definitely thought he was possessed by demons, and he actually had a kind of exorcism in prison where these spirits kind of shot out of him all at once. It looked like the guards thought he was having an epileptic fit, and he claimed that he was going through a process of diabolical expulsion. These demons were leaving his body. This is his testimony now. There again, Mark David Chapman was someone who worshipped both God and Satan. On the day he murdered Lennon, he called upon Satan to give him strength to do it. So he was kind of a very individual practitioner type Satanist. But he was definitely a Satanist, Mark David Chapman. What I'm going to bring out in my book, The Beatles and the Occult, also is that John Lennon was an incredibly, incredibly superstitious man. And he and Yoko Ono used to hire psychics and tarot card readers and astrologers. They had a whole crew of them. And they would advise John and Yoko over where John should be when, as to avoid getting assassinated. He was paranoid of getting assassinated, John Lennon, and he would actually take these feng shui type trips. You know, these advisors would say that, you know, the Caribbean would be safe for you for a month, or Hawaii would be safe for you for 3 weeks. And they picked these spots through these divinations. So strangely enough, John Lennon was playing a kind of metaphysical cat and mouse game with, you know, some of these other people who were into the occult, like Mark David Chapman. And of course, you really can't hide from someone that determined to kill you. And that's what Chapman did, you know, on that horrible day, which I remember.
Well, you'll definitely have to reach out to Chip as you're doing this, because he actually is friends with a lady who was very close to Mark David Chapman. He used to come over and hang out with her kids. She was, I think he was like their camp counselor. Wasn't that it, Tim?
Yeah.
And he became very close to her family. And as we discussed on our show, and for people that are interested, you can check our archives. Tim, maybe you can look that up for us and find out what the date was on that. But there's really an interesting story to that, and I actually shed a little light on that for her. He showed up just before he assassinated Lennon back on their property, looking for the family. And I had often wondered if maybe they were part of his plot to, you know, be a part of this to kill them as well.
Or even to go a little bit further, to slay the family in some sort of satanic ritual in order to continue on and gain his power to kill Lennon.
Yeah, so there was, you know, we talked of that. So that would definitely recommend, if you get a chance to talk to them.
Sure, email me his address. I'd really appreciate it, guys.
Sure, not a problem.
I'm starting that book in September. You read my mind or something.
See how
it's
we
really
are?
Bizarre. The guy who tried to stab George Harrison to death, who broke into his house.
Right.
That when you look at the details of that, that's very, very weird, because he thought the Beatles were actually casting witchcraft spells into his mind from their music. And when he went to Harrison's house, he hopped over the fence and he actually smashed a statue St. George, the dragon slayer.
Right.
And he threw this chunk of this cement angel's wing through the window to get into the place. Now, George Harrison and his wife were upstairs, and why George Harrison went out to see what was going on was because his mother-in-law was 3 bedrooms down, and she was very sick, and her door wasn't locked. So if George Harrison and his wife were alone there, they normally would have locked the door and just called security. But George Harrison, you know, he was a tough Liverpool kid.
Right.
You know, he had guts. He wasn't going to let his mother-in-law certainly get harmed by some nut. So he went out to confront him. And what George Harrison did to confuse him is he started saying Hare Krishna, which further infuriated this nut. And he stabbed George Harrison, and George Harrison's lung actually collapsed.
Right. And
he survived that. Now, what I just read the other day, which shocked me, that fellow whose name has slipped my mind, he's free. He was sent to a mental home, and then he was allowed to go free.
Right.
He nearly killed George Harrison. But when you look at the Beatles, even things like Lennon's assassination and the attempted assassination of George Harrison, the occult undertones are all there. You know, it's like you can't get away from them when you're dealing with the Beatles. All this occultism is right below the surface. Even throwing the angel's wing through the window is a very odd, you know, it's just strange. It's a strange fact. But I'll be bringing this out in, as I say, my Beatles in the Occult book.
And what's so strange to me is that the Beatles would be so tightly tied to the occult. I would have thought it had been the Archies.
Well, you know, sugar, you know, that you know. Jughead has kind of a mean look on his face.
He does. You can't trust him.
I don't trust that. Never trusted Jughead. Anyone who has a grin like that, there's something wrong underneath.
I always thought Reggie was an angel of God.
Well, you know, that's okay. That's all right.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about some of the other cases in there. Who did you find to be the most frightening case, the most frightening person that seemed to have really immersed themselves into this demonic realm?
Boy, that... Excuse me, I got a little head cold today. I actually took some NyQuil before the show, so I'm feeling a bit of a buzz.
Oh,
so did we, coincidentally. So yeah, we're all buzzing together.
We're highballing on some NyQuil.
I'm feeling good at the moment. I apologize for the coughing.
No, that's fine.
But just to get back to our grim topic, that's really hard to say. You know, it's really difficult. There's so many wackos in my book that it's really tough. I mean, Richard Ramirez used to rape little children because he knew it was the worst thing he could do to them.
Mm-hmm.
It was worse than murder. He knew that. He thought that out in his mind. He said, well, if you kill a kid, then their suffering's over. But if you rape a kid, their suffering has just begun. So that was one of the more, you know,
evil,
deranged
twisted,
things
right.
in this, you know. But there's so many in this book. I mean, I guess the person who scared me the most was a fellow from Belgium named Marc Dutroux. And my book, Satanic Crime, is the first book to link global elites in these secret societies to serial killers and Satanism. And just to break down real quick, Marc Dutroux was arrested in the mid-'90s for kidnapping children. And what he was doing is he was holding them in his basement, and he was selling them to rich elite pedophile rings in Europe, which involves some of the, you know, major leaders in Belgium and Europe generally. Now, what happened is when Dutroux got arrested, it turns out that he had 4 accomplices, and what the judge did over there, a judge named Judge Connor Road, judges in Europe can call for more investigations in a case. It's very different from here in the States where, excuse me, what evidence you get is presented that day and the judge makes their decision. In Europe, it's different. A judge can say, well, we'll have to look into this case more. We need more investigation. What happened is he called for anyone to come forward who was abused by Marc Dutroux, and 10 women came forward and said they were raped in Dutroux's bizarre sex cult. and they started to name names of people who were involved with this sex cult, and that includes King Albert of Belgium. That includes Willy Klaus, the former Secretary General of NATO, and both those men are also Bilderberg members. The Bilderberg Group, which is a group of rich people who meet in Europe every year. It was started in 1954. It was at the Bilderberg Hotel in Europe. And all of these super rich elite meet once a year at this secret private meeting. And what we're discovering now is many of these same people who go to these meetings, like King Albert and Willy Klaus, were also involved with Marc Dutroux's pedophile ring. Dutroux, by the way, he's been very undercovered by the media in the United States. He's the Charles Manson of Europe. And what happened, I was living in England in 1996 when Dutroux was sentenced, and they actually had a big march in Brussels called the White March. It was the biggest protest in history. Between 350 and 400,000 people came to central Brussels dressed in white to protest the Marc Dutroux case and how the court started to throw out the investigations into the elite pedophiles being involved with Marc Dutroux. Now, a detective named George Marnay started to investigate this pedophile ring, and what he discovered was that these rich groups would meet at various castles throughout Europe, and they would have ceremonies like you would see in Stanley Kubrick's film Eyes Wide Shut.
Right.
You know, those kind of very bizarre sex Satanist rituals. And I'm also told that Stanley Kubrick was once invited to one of these. I haven't been able to confirm it, but that's where he got the idea for Eyes Wide Shut. And Marc Dutroux is currently in prison. Now, Marc Dutroux claims to be a Satanist, and he claims that his pedophile network were Satanists as well. And he has confirmed that people like Willy Klaus were at these bizarre orgies. Now, just to tell you who Willy Klaus is, Willy Klaus was the Secretary of Belgium, Secretary of State, and he's personally responsible for the Rwandan genocide. He's the one who withdrew Belgian troops from Rwanda and requested that the UN not aid any of the Tutsis who were being massacred by the Hutu tribe down there. It was inappropriate decolonization, but Willy Klaus was behind that. Willy Klaus was made the Secretary General of NATO, and he was forced to resign because he was taking bribes from a helicopter company. And Willy Klaus now, it's very strange. I have this right on my Satanic Crime multimedia page at williamhkennedy.com. Willy Klaus, who is now in his 70s, did a satanic-type television commercial for Limbo Mania, which is a heavy metal rock concert in Belgium. And it's a really bizarre thing. Take a look at it. It's at the Satanic Crime multimedia page in the Bilderberg section at williamhkennedy.com. He does a devil summoning ritual. So when you add all these bizarre things up, the fact that, you know, he was accused of being involved in a satanic conspiracy to rape children, and then all these other horrible things happen to him, or he does all these horrible things, and to top off his career, he does a more or less Satanist television commercial. So I guess, as I say, the case of Marc Dutroux is the most disturbing because you see it tied in with world leaders.